Welcome to the workshop. Today we're going to talk about this gorgeous Swiss 1842/59 rifled musket. Now, the musket itself is, let's say, fairly unremarkable compared to its contemporary rifled muskets around the world at the time. However, what's interesting is how it came to be and perhaps what it could have been. So as with most countries starting from about the 1830s, Switzerland slowly transitioned between flintlock ignition system to the percussion system. And like everywhere else, this was done in two ways. Firstly, by converting the existing flintlocks that were still in good enough condition, and then building purpose-built new percussion arms. Switzerland was a little unusual in that when they did the conversion and the new rifles, they chose to have a patent breech system. So as you can see here, there's a new portion of breech. Now this one is a purpose-built new rifle. So the new barrel here is screwed in here, but also the old flintlock rifles, muskets, sorry, would have had then the old section of breech cut off, and it would have been screwed in to this new portion here. Most patent breech systems have a little powder chamber, a reduced diameter portion. It favours ignition. This one has actually just a little dish, little bowl portion, which is really annoying to clean. Now the actual conversion was a standardised pattern, particularly on the shape of the hammer and the breech system, as I just discussed. It wasn't applied universally. The actual decree for the sort of universal adoption of this pattern was in 1848. Switzerland had just emerged from the last little civil war, so a religio-political conflict, look up Sonderbund War, and some cantons had previously heavily invested in conversions of another now non-standard pattern. So some allowances were made to keep simply for practical and economic reasons, to keep the slightly different pattern. As long as the caliber was fine, there was no real issue. So you'll find still a variety of official conversions that don't correspond exactly to the pattern. Okay, so everyone's now up to speed with percussion locks. Now the next big leap is to adopt rifling for everyone. Now this was something of a big leap. Before, it was known as really only for firearms of the elite, sharpshooters, skirmishers, that kind of thing. The line infantry, it wasn't really worth it, and considering the tactics, it's sensible enough. However, conflicts like the Crimea Round 1 brought up the advantages of having rifled firearms for line infantry, particularly the British. But the Russians and the French also were fielding rifled firearms, rifled carbines and things like this, to a smaller extent, but that conflict really brought into evidence the advantages of having even line infantry with rifled firearms. So the Swiss transition from a smoothbore percussion musket to a rifled percussion musket is actually relatively slow and late. 1855 is when things get going. And that is due to the efforts of a certain Edouard Burnand, who was convinced that he could find an easy way to convert these muskets. And he gets wind of a certain civilian gunsmith called Jean-Louis Prélat, who is boasting that he has a percussion rifle that is accurate up to 1,200 meters. So he goes and meets the gentleman, and indeed tests prove that it is capable of that accuracy, which is of course astounding for the time. And the secret was actually a two-groove gain twist rifling with a smooth transition between the grooves and the lands, and it was a 0.47 inch bullet, apparently a flat base bullet, but however to load it you needed to have a careful stacking of the powder, greased wad, and a close fitting bullet. So something I imagine quite similar to a Whitworth type configuration. There's no mention of it being hexagonal, but or even that it's a sort of belted type arrangement like a Brunswick. But the loading was very important to get consistent accuracy. However, they thought, hey, maybe we can team up and try and sell this to everyone. And it seemed to have gathered quite a lot of attention. This was at the time of the Crimean War. So allegedly France, England and Russia were very interested in it, even Russia hinting at a possible contract. This is anecdotal evidence from the diaries of Bernard himself, so I have no means to confirm or deny that. There's also a very amusing anecdote that they were testing, or they were showing the abilities of this rifle in France, and Mr. Minier was present on the field, and he was most displeased that this system was more accurate than his, and he was actively berating his fellow officers who were cheering every time that a good shot was scored. So anyway, of course, when you realise, a bit like the Whitworth actually, that because you needed this very careful loading cycle, it was totally unsuitable for a standard line infantry firearm, where you had to trade off accuracy with rapidity of fire and reloading. So obviously this went nowhere. However, the team stayed together, the Prélat-Bernard team stayed together, and they would then apply their energies to try and adapt the process or the characteristics of this rifling and projectile to the standard line infantry rifle. This actually simply ballistically blown up to 17.5, 18 millimeter just did not work. So eventually they went back to a sort of conventional shallow 4-groove rifling, and the only vestiges of which are something unusual is they developed this funny rear sight here, which is somewhat characteristic of this rifle, and it is calibrated between 400, 600 and 800 Schritt paces, and in its lowest setting you aim through the middle groove on the hinge, which is 200 paces. Interestingly enough, when they converted the rifles, they didn't bother to remove the fixed sight from the smoothbore rifle, because actually you sort of sight slightly above it, so it's not in the way, and one less operation to grind it out. Now, thanks to the obsessive record keeping of the Confederacy, I was lucky to find a military journal which lists the actual testing criteria for the suitability of the conversion. There were 9 points. This is from October 1857, and so I'll just quickly go through. Accuracy, this was tested at the sights, obviously, 200, 400, 600, 800 paces, which equates to 150 meters, 300 meters, 450 meters, and 600 meters, roughly. Why they tested at 600, I don't know, but they did. Penetration, this was done at 600 paces, and that was consisted of shooting at 1-inch thick pine boards, and at 600, which is 450 meters, they found that it completely penetrated 3 boards and got stuck in the 4th. So this is a big solid Minier here, so even at 450 it still had a fair whack. Recoil, this was tested with a dynamometer. 39 pounds was the recorded recoil, which was acceptable. Ease and speed of loading. Influence of fouling on accuracy. Very important, of course, in the black powder period. This was tested by firing 60 shots at 600 paces, leaving the rifle uncleaned overnight, and then concluding with another 60 shots afterwards. Ease of ammunition production. One of the criteria was that the ammunition could be manufactured wherever on the field, if necessary. What else do we have? General ease of handling and cleaning of the musket. Ability to use older types of ammunition. Now, I found this point quite interesting. This would obviously be, you could imagine there's an interim period where troops will have rifled versions and non-rifled versions. And there may also be some logistical mix-ups. So you may be, in some cases, be forced to use the smoothbore ammunition, which is round ball, in your rifled firearm. So they took this into consideration, and they noted that the round ball ammunition functioned. Accuracy obviously dropped off, but it was still more accurate than the smoothbore. So that was fine as far as they were concerned, and of course ease and cost of conversion. So passed all these requirements with flying colours, and they set about doing the conversions for everyone, including the previously percussionized flintlock muskets. So you will find some of these which have the sort of old-fashioned pointed lock, so without this big square point on the front, which is one of the distinguishing features of the 1842 Swiss pattern. There's actually nothing here. If I see, here we go. There's the lock there. They just decided that they would do away with, usually you get a sort of fancy cutout here in the wood with a relatively thin bit of stock remaining here, which is prone to cracking. They just did away with it and just replaced it with a big metal slab. But you will find then some of the older ones with the more sort of ornate flintlock lock faces, which will have had the new breech, new hammer, and then the rifling and the rear sight installed as well. The criteria was that the barrels that still had were between 17.7 and 18.1 millimeters were deemed having to have enough meat on them to be rifled. So in the end, Edouard Bournand was put in charge of overseeing the conversions. You know, it was more or less his pet project from the start. He eventually fell out with Mr. Prélat, who went his own way, carried on his very successful civilian gunsmithing. And while Bournand was overseeing this, a certain Friedrich Vetterli was called back from London, where he was working, to help in the whole process. And it was interesting that while Bournand was in charge, he actually oversaw the transition from his system to the Vetterli. Anyway, why don't we stop talking about it and have a quick overview of the ammunition, and then let's go out and shoot it. So luckily for the information on the rifle cartridge, I had everything I needed in this volume, which you caught a glimpse of at the beginning. This is part 2 of a long series, Bewaffnung und Ausrüstung der Schweiz Armee seit 1817. So this covers the percussion era, the first breechloaders up to and including the Peabody. And the Vetterli will be a second volume, which I also highly recommend. Anyway, luckily this has all the information about the dimensions of the cartridge, the makeup of the cartridge, which in here is called a GP 1859. So here you can see a picture and a section of a period cartridge. Note that the minier is completely separate from the powder charge. And luckily the book on another page includes this wonderful picture of all the tools and components of the cartridge. And so I spent many hours with a good magnifying glass carefully converting the pre-metric units of feet, inches, lines and stripes, which are of course different to everybody else's inches and lines and etc. But luckily the book provides a conversion, and I came up with these dimensions for the cartridge wrap and the powder cup. And I also put the GoFundMe lathe to good use and made myself a series of tools to help in the making of the cartridges. Now the cartridge itself is fairly easy to make. This is a rolling mandrel which has 2 steps here, one for forming the powder cup and this for the actual wrap. Here in the nose we have a cavity which I have tried more or less to reproduce the curvature of the minier. And then you have various little pushers so that the wrap of the cup, and then at the end also the into the base cavity of the bullet is nicely pushed in there. This is actually part of a little sizing die which I made so that I can size these miniers down to the correct size, which is about 7.4 millimeters. These come out about 7.7. Now, making the cartridge is actually pretty straightforward. First you take the what will become the powder charge cup. Now this is quite peculiar in that, contrary to most Continental cartridges that I've seen, it is exactly sized to take the powder charge rather than just sitting on top of the bullet and extending all the way up to the outside of the cartridge. So this is the finished article here, and if I pour in the regulation 4.5 grams of powder carefully, you will see that it just fits the powder charge. Now, whether this was just economy of paper or to make it easier to tear off, I don't know, but I thought it was typically Swiss to have something exactly dimensioned for its purpose. Now this is the original powder was number 4, which equates to 1.5 F. This still exists. The Swiss powder granulometry is still in number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can use exactly the same kind of grain as there was before. I don't have any, so number 3 is 3F. Number 2 will have to do for now. Anyway, this should stay on the mandrel during manufacture. If I can put it back on, like so. Then you would take your bullet, stick that in the end there, grab your what would become your wrapper, place it on there, leave about just over half an inch out the back, and then roll the whole thing up. Once again, twist the end and push that in to the back of the cartridge. I'm not doing a very good job here with the camera a bit in front of me. And once again, you would push that firmly into the cavity. Here I've actually made, this is actually the pusher for resizing the miniers, because they come out of the mold slightly too fat. So I've reproduced the the cavity, the shape of the cavity plug there. So that's firmly in there. Now what I guess would happen now is that this bit would be lubed here up to the end of the cylindrical portion of the cartridge. So I can do that like that. Be prepared heated wax. And once that would be dry, and remove the mandrel, you can see the cup is there pressed up against the nose of the bullet, and you would fill the powder and then simply fold down the excess paper and fold it over. So you end up something like this. Now I had a discussion with that renowned mustachioed master of musketry that is Rob from British Muzzleloaders as to why they bothered with the powder cup, because the round ball cartridges don't bother with it. So, you know, sort of theorize as to why. Of course, it stops powder migrating down and along into the grooves and all sorts of the minier when this is being bounced around inside your cartridge pouch. And of course, having powder down there would probably be detrimental for loading and also for accuracy if you've got powder grains catching fire down the sides. Another one is that you basically then have a weak line of paper around the end of the cartridge here, which makes it easy to tear off, because then this bit is actually doubly thick. So yeah, it was interesting to muse on why this was done, but it's not a Swiss thing, it's done everywhere. So how was this loaded? Well, here we have the dummy cartridge. It's just got some tissue paper in there because I don't want to pour powder down here because I'm just going to have to clean it out again. So you would take your cartridge, you would use your good teeth, tear off the excess, pour the powder down into the barrel, inverse the cartridge, insert the bullet down to the cylindrical portion, tear off the excess, get my cleaning rod out. Do I have enough sealing space? No. Anyway, ramrod out, push that all the way down, and I'll just remove this while I remember. Then you could put on a percussion cap, full cock, and away you go. Right, let's do it for real now. So here we are at the range, 50 metres as usual, with the unfortunate wabbit as the target. And I've got my cartridges here, 15 of them, and I'll be interested to see if I can get through 15 without having to swab out the barrel at least once. Of course, if you do in the international pattern muzzleloading competitions, you're not allowed to swab between shots, so I shall be faithful both historically and according to modern regulations. I shall, however, be loading as approximately as I can to the original, so I'll use the original ramrod and be biting, pouring and stuffing down the bore as they would have done back then.
How much do you need to load in? How much do you need to load?
2.
Oi! So that's everything. That's a lot.
Charge jusqu'à la graisse. Déchire. Baguette.
Ah! Baguette. Until where does it go?
Jusqu'à sur le haut de la poudre.
Here. Okay. Until here.
Jusque là.
What?
Ouais, en arrière.
Okay. I'm not here.
Lapin touché.
Missed.
So for some reason, this 13th shot is not going off. Powder and ball is in there. I've given it a good long weight, dismantled the percussion nipple, had a look inside, it's all clear. The only thing I can think of is that it's one of the cartridges that I left mid-production in the workshop and the powder got damp. So for the first time in my life, I'm going to have to pull everything out from the muzzle end. Right, so here I've got a ball puller, it's just a screw. You can see there in the camera. And I'll put that down bore until that screws into the minier and pull it. Luckily, as you could see, the bullets are going down still pretty smoothly, so I shouldn't expect to have to pull very hard to pull everything out. Yeah, so this was how it was done back in the day. Obviously your musket will be out of action for a considerable amount of time, relatively speaking. So let's see how it goes. Voilà, alors maintenant on visse. Heureusement le plomb est mou. Ça va bien dedans. Ça mord. Ça mord dans le plomb. Ben, ça mord. Enfin. Voilà. Et maintenant. Hop. On visse. On n'est pas loin. Et voilà. Boum.
You broke it.
There we go. There's the extracted minier.
It looks like a Buddha. Leopold.
Now, Mistress Chap has gone off with the bullet for some forensic analysis, and we are now hopefully up and running again for the last two. Still no cleaning. Toujours rien. That still didn't go off, so what I did was remove the nipple, dribble a very small amount of pan powder in the flash channel underneath the nipple, screw the everything back in, so sort of dieseled the whole ignition. I suspect there's just now what's beginning to happen is that fouling is starting to block the opening inside the chamber. So one to go, see what happens. That we're done. 15 gone with that mishap, but loading as easy as ever. Go and see what the damage is. So, thank you, Mistress Chap, for holding the camera. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 14 is probably the one I pulled. And 15 is really the one that I had to duplex load to get out of the bore. So I'm guessing that probably deformed the skirt or something and that went weighing off somewhere else. So, shame about those two. But otherwise, that's a pretty good strip, you know, for a man-sized target, using basically a carbon copy of the regulation cartridge. It's pretty good. I was aiming here on the basis of, if I haven't found the Swiss instructions yet, but based on the French instructions of the same time, they said basically under 200 with the fixed sight, you aimed for waist height. And point of aim, point of impact was somewhere about 150, 200 meters. So, no, this would definitely hit a target within that range. There we go, all cleaned and oiled, ready for the gun rack again, including the annoying little dished section in the breech there. The regulation cartridge works wonderfully well. Recoil is actually pretty mild. I could have been loading that, goodness how many. We saw in the test phase there, they were doing 60 without cleaning and then another 60 after overnight, so it'd be interesting. As to the blockage I had, I guess it was just down to bad luck. I actually found in the documentation that the sort of boosting with a little bit of powder is actually listed as one of the solutions. First one was simply to try and unblock it with the tool as a little pick. But if you see if you remember the shape of the firing channel, it's not actually that easy. And then they recommend to pour some powder in and try and blow it out. Now, I would guess that would mean back in the day, you would have to maybe bleed off another cartridge because you'd no longer have any means, priming means as if you had with a flintlock. But yeah, anyway, I think that was just bad luck. So you saw also that the last cartridge I fired, I had great difficulty in tearing the cartridge. And that was actually the first one I had made when I was still figuring out the sizes for the cartridges. And I'd used this squared little note paper, which seems to have a very tough grain structure, or fiber structure more precisely. So I won't be using that again. However, normal printer paper, that's just fine. It gives the right thickness to the cartridge with the grease so that it just goes down without just barely touching the sides. And yeah, so I'll continue just using that, plentiful and cheap. So the life of this, well, the actually percussion rifles, whether it's the new ones or the flintlock converted ones, of course, didn't end here, because they had one more task to fulfill, and that was, of course, to bridge the gap between percussion and breechloading with the Milbank-Amsler transformation. Now this, I have an entire episode which I've linked in the description and in the end of the video, which shows how this was developed and adopted, and obviously eventually gave way to the Vetterli. So thank you all for watching. I hope that wasn't too boring, and thank you for your support, be it as patrons, and of course all your comments on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. So I shall see you again either in the workshop or on the range. Bye.